Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the IDRiM podcast. And this episode, there is no guest, but we will delve into on the both of us as your hosts delve into about what's coming this year, which is on IDRiM 2025, in particular focusing on the special sessions that we already have in every IDRiM conferences. It's called the Young Scientist Sessions or YSS. And here with me, Mark, not as my co-host, but more about his become some kind of chameleon, which is also part of the Young Scientist Sessions committee of the iDream Society. So here we will discuss about that in depth and hopefully we'll give you more informations. So Mark,
Mhm.
first of all, can you tell me or tell us all of to our audience what is YSS in particular and why it is so unique in iDream Society?
Okay, thanks, Harris. So the Young Scientist Session is an initiative that was first born out of the DPRI YASA series, so preceding the iDream Society's run of conferences. It's a special type of competition that is particularly for young researchers, and I will want to specify what I mean by a young researcher, first of all. So a young researcher does not necessarily mean by age or position. What we mean by that in the qualifications for a young researcher is, whilst presenters previously have been predominantly graduate students or masters included, PhD candidates, or researchers, who have already got their PhD within the last 4 years. We also focus on practitioners who have started in the disaster field, say within the last 4 years roughly, and also researchers who are making their debut in international academic discussion. What we've done this year in particular is that we've kind of changed the criteria a little bit, and we recognize that people don't have this linear development on their careers, and situations in life, sadly, where we have to take our research and our work has to take a back step. So if, for example, if you've had an illness, a family illness, or even maternity leave, we don't count those periods within the last 4 years. What we also, as I mentioned, is about age. Now, individuals who pursue a PhD or a master's later in life after having a significant career change, they also qualify as well for this. The only exception would be is if you've not had a PhD, but you've gone for it later, but you've already worked in the field as a practitioner or made significant contributions to the disaster field in your career. We might not allow that, and what we will do in that case is we would, judge it on case by case situation. So what I'm trying to say about that is that the entrance criteria is a bit different in terms of if you're a bit older, but you probably still will be able to enter. Now, one of the reasons why it's so unique and a special occasion in the iDream Society is that we allow young people to actually have a voice and present their research. So historically, the way this would work is, and Harris, you've been through this previously under the old format, is that we would have a special parallel set of sessions where it will be young scientists, and you get historically about 8-10 minutes um, to do this. Since 2023, we've changed the format of this. So the format now is that you will present alongside senior researchers with the same amount of time for your presentation and discussion. So the idea now is that you're at the exact same. Doesn't matter, what position you are. It doesn't matter if you're a young, early career researcher or a senior researcher with 30 years experience. You get the same equal opportunities. And it's so unique because there is not many conferences that do this, where we have, young researchers and senior researchers are treated the same. So a lot of conferences, when I was a very young researcher, would actually put you into poster sessions and, kind of push you to the side, and you'd have to build up that credibility over time. In IDRiM, it's a bit different, where we actually doesn't matter, as I mentioned, it does not matter. And the competition is also a way that senior researchers will judge you and give you a score depending on a set of criteria, which I will go into obviously a little bit later. And the idea is that you'll also get written feedback. So not only do you get to present your research internationally to an international audience, you also get constructive feedback from senior researchers to improve your research. And we have had students in the past who've taken that feedback away with them, and actually it's helped them refine their PhD, their methodological approach, etc.
So it's basically a lot of digest, and like let me break down one by one.
Yeah,
First about, well, you mentioned about the definition of YSS itself, like, which is, in my opinion, it was very broad, which is like you actually acknowledge in this particular edition of iDream that it can include uh, various backgrounds and various upcomings, young scholars, or maybe someone that actually have not done enough research, and so on and so on. Well, regarding this, how the committee ensure that everybody will be equal in terms of judging, because like well, as you mentioned, there may be some students coming and like some not student anymore also entrancing, and like, well, in terms of uh starting point, it might be different, right? And
mm,
how the committee ensure that there are actually equal ground to compete within this session.
yeah, absolutely. And it is important to acknowledge that. So what will happen is you don't just get one judge, you get a series of judges from different backgrounds. So they'll be able to look at different points of aspect. One thing we do know is some people may think that, oh, a more senior researcher who's just finishing their PhD, they're going to have a bigger advantage over someone who hasn't. I necessarily don't agree with that. And I think that actually our results in recent years kind of lean that way as well. So I can give an example that back in Romania in 2022, one of the participants who actually came in the top three, won one of the awards, actually, they were a master student. They were competing against PhD students and early career researchers who got PhDs, and they were just as good, if not better. And that actually, what I think that's a credit of actually, it doesn't sometimes necessarily mean that if, it doesn't matter where you are in your research track, if you are good, you are good. And this person was really good and actually did really good. And we don't, say, oh, this person, oh, they're early and we'll give a boost of scope. We don't do that, but we do take into account, and that's the whole point of the constructive feedback, is that no one ever gets everything perfect. There's always areas we can improve on and refine. Also, if you're an early career researcher who is master's thinking of PhD, or in the first year of the PhD hasn't done a lot of research, well, actually, isn't that a good thing? Getting that constructive feedback. Doesn't matter if you haven't won that year, because obviously there's no cash prize to it, and we're not that type of society. But actually getting constructive feedback from people who are not your supervisors, who will look at this issue from a completely different point of view, that actually improves it. That can improve your research, and that is only can be a great thing.
Oh, so, well, you already put everything in place, and yeah, as you mentioned, that one of the most awarding things about when participating in the YSS is basically we can get directly feedback from the senior researchers where uh, we are in the same session with them, and like after the presentations we can actually they come to us and like give some advice, or we can also ask them uh to get their view on what our presentation was about. The second thing that I would like to ask is basically, as you mentioned, that there is a format change from 2023, and now what do you think the format is needs to be changed, and how how it improve, let's say, the way the conference has been conducted, or maybe also improve the quality that coming from the OSS itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So the format change actually starts back to 2021, but the main format change happened in 23. So just to go a little bit further back, 21, when we had it in Kyoto, as you will know, it was an online conference. So 21 and 22 in Romania, they were both online conferences. So that was already a start of a change. And I took over the reign of the YSS, committee chair in 22, quite late on, and that gave me a chance to look over, how it was looked at and how it was being treated. And yes, we had quite a lot of participants. And I'll break those numbers down a little later of how it's changed over time. But one of the things I started to think was, why, if we're going to promote young researchers and we're trying to get young researchers into this field, why would we treat them differently? So back then they'd have short presentations of 8 minutes, maybe 2 minutes for questions, if there's time, and then you would do a poster, and you do the poster presentation. And what I started to notice, in particular at the poster presentation online, but I also started to think about past conferences I went to, is some of them, you don't get a lot of participants going around looking at posters. So I felt, well, that's not the best thing. I mean, it's not necessarily a problem with posters, but when you've got, in say the Romania conference, we had 47 young scientists, 47 young scientists with posters. It was a bit of a situation where I was feeling, this is not the best use of time and the space. Where actually, if they were treated the same, it actually might encourage more young researchers to participate. It might give them more confidence, for to say, oh, I'm just the same as the next presenter. So, and having that integration actually helped, because it meant that they weren't, kept aside as well. So when the young scientists used to participate, they used to be put in a different slot away from everyone else. So sometimes we had participants, they would present at 8 in the morning, and then the rest of the conference would start at 10 o'clock. And it meant that it made me some questions like, well, are all the senior researchers participating? Are all the participants going to be there? Once they're integrated in and they're in their theme, actually that helps, because also they're bouncing off other researchers as well. We know that the senior researchers are going to be there with their expertise. So that actually helps in that way. The other thing why we had to make that change was to do with the transition from 22 to 23. And what was going on at this point was we were starting to resume back to in-person conferences in Rookie in 23. And the question became, well, we're going to keep the online sessions because we know not everyone's going to be able to travel. And what do we do with the online versus in-person if we're going to have them short, snap presentations away from everyone else? And now, so that was another element to it. And it was much easier to actually have everyone in set rooms with topics, same length, rather than, having to try and find everyone and, in short time, where if you miss your slot by a couple of minutes, you've lost time speaking and there's not a lot of time. So it actually kind of helped a little bit more.
So it's basically one of the driver of change during the conference format change as well. And like as you mentioned, like being in the same sessions regarded as the same, let's say, equal standing on the presentations with the senior researchers actually boosts the confidence of the young scientists, I believe. And so, as you mentioned, that 2023 and 2024, there is the questions that we should keep the online sessions, right? And like in the end, like as we witnessed, it's basically two two types of YSS, online and offline, or online in persons. So will such format will also occurring in this year's iDreams, or there will be some change on it?
There's going to be a slight change this year, again, and this is moving in line with the way conferences are starting to go, but trying to recognize other challenges. So the way that this will happen is, yes, there will be an online as well as an in-person competition, as in the last couple of years. But we experimented with something last year, and we've all agreed that this is the best approach going forward. We experienced a lot of tech issues last year when we were in Colombia with if what happens if sessions overrun, what happens, and it can get quite a bit messy when you've got online participants don't know what time they're going to speak. So what we're going to do this year is actually we're going to have the in person is going to be staying exactly as it has been for the last few years. But this year we're going to keep the online, but we're going to put it a few days previous to the main conference. So, as noted, the main conference this year is going to be between the 28th and of September to the 1st of October. What will happen this year is that the online YSS will take place on the 23rd, so the Tuesday, the 23rd of September, and it will follow the clock round. So we could be, this session will have multiple sessions, could last, depending on how many participants we get, 16, 18 hours, very depending on time zones around the world. So you don't have to worry this year if you're not in the, if you're in a time zone in Japan and the conference is, in obviously in Greece and the time zone doesn't work very, very well for you. That's not going to be a problem this year because we're going to follow you around. Unless a person has a participant wants to speak at different times, and that's fine. But broadly, what will probably happen is we will start in the Asia Pacific region, and we'll follow around, coming to Europe and then into the Americas throughout the day. And the idea is that we were determined to keep the online session, because first of all, the number of participants who actually, and I'm happy to show this in a minute, using the online is still quite high. But also, and this was actually when I was making the decisions going into 23, and at the time we weren't sure whether we were going to be still fully in person or online. And I remember, and this is a story of how it worked. I remember I was in Kansai Airport, and I was coming back from the Gadri Summit in Kyoto, and had about 12, 18 hours to spare because of the way of the planes was quite a late plane. And I was sat there and I'm thinking, how do we encourage young participants if we don't have the in person? And I started to think, well, because my concern was, and coming from the UK where we don't get a large, amount of money when we're doing a PhD, less so if you're doing a master's, and I'm thinking, well, how do we encourage those to travel if they're not getting any research grants to travel, they can't afford it? And I started to think, well, we do need to then keep the online bit, and that is an important key. And I remember writing up a whole brief of what we need to do for the YSS coming up to 2025, so this year. And this is a part of the plan, the original plan, which was we keep the online, and if needs be, we put it away from the main conference itself so that the young scientists still can participate. And yes, we know that it's not the same if you're not going to be in the main one. So this year we are going to implement some new ideas to actually help young researchers in their career development, which we've never done in IDRiM before, and also to get feedback from young scientists for the first time and actually say, well, how does IDRiM help? How can IDRiM help you? So it's going to be the first time, a very much a two-way street of learning off each other, where senior researchers in committees are going to start learning from the young ones what they want, and what can we do to support them.
It's like very interesting concept. Like, can you give more elaborations on what's new this year? You mentioned that there will be some giving back to the young researcher from the iDRiM and how it's actually helped them to advance their career.
Absolutely. So this year, what we're going to do, and I'm just loading up my notes for this. What we're going to do is, for the first time, on the Wednesday, so the day after the online YSS, we're going to host a series of workshops that are going to be predominantly for career development. So what we've done is we've looked at and we've all thought back as, when we were young researchers, what would help us the most. So these 8 workshops, and some of them will be repeated throughout the day. So if you are if it's early in the morning, thinking of GMT, European time, and you're in America, it's the middle of the night, and you miss a session, we will repeat some of these sessions. So we try to give it give you as equal opportunity, not make it so that you have to wake up in the middle of the night to watch these. But the 8 sessions will be navigating the publishing maze and expert insight from editors. So what this will be is about, this session is very much about, writing for academic journals. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring editors from these journals in to give their expertise on what makes a strong submission, what are the common pitfalls to avoid. So especially if you're an early career researcher and you're making your first couple of journals, I think all of us get rejected from our first paper because we are going in these pitfalls. So the idea is to say, well, how do I avoid these? Spot these before I put them in. But also, so we'll be doing that through real life stories. So some of our ones will give their what happened to them through the first few papers as well, but also give them a better understanding of the process of how journals are edited, and basically give you an examples from their own journals of what they can break down what makes a good paper. The second one is very much about unlocking academic funding, grant writing strategies and opportunities. So the idea is, when you come to do a PhD, and especially if you're coming out of a PhD, the likelihood is you've either done a couple of small grants, or you've done no grants at all and write proposals for grants. And the idea is that it can be overwhelming if you don't do it. So the idea of the session is basically it's to give an insight of what actually makes a very successful grant proposal. What are the issues that people typically will do? Especially if you're breaking down funding, is always going to be the hardest bit. And the idea is that we will also offer the young scientists, because we're bringing in the funders. Hopefully, we're going to say, well, there's this funding, it offers this amount, if you do, and then this one. So the idea is actually it gives a better insight of where there is potential funding out there. And obviously that doesn't have to mean that it's just for early career researchers. Obviously all more experienced researchers can also benefit from that. The third one, which it may seem counterintuitive on the timing of it. So it's about presenting with an impact. Now, the online participants will have presented the previous day. So sadly, it's just the way the timing goes. But because it's the online participants are going to be presented in a separate competition, it's not going to affect their ability because it's not an overall awards in person online. But the idea is that what we're going to try and do is say, what do you need to do to get high scores? So actually, this will be useful outside when you're presenting your research in other conferences. It's going to help you. But we also recognize that research is important outside of just academia. Research should also have an impact communities. And the idea is that how do you take challenging issues, and some of disaster sciences are quite challenging to understand, even as an academic, and actually make it without losing the meaning to a wider audience. And the idea is to say, well, I'm not an expert, but I understand this, listening to you. And that's the whole point of doing this. The fourth one is what we call bridging the gap from researcher to practitioner. And this is a question that I think that for most young researchers will face at some point. Do I stay in academia, or do I transition to being a practitioner? And the idea is to explore in this session the rewarding and impactful world that practitioners can actually have. So it's to say that you don't have to stay as an academic in a research to make a huge impact in DRR. Practitioners make just as much impact, and the idea of the session is to talk to people who have made these transitions in the past and to say what are the challenges they experienced, what the skills they felt they needed. And it's just to help young researchers actually recognize that there is a world outside of academia that they can transition to go into. The fifth one is a session called Hazard Information Profiles and Introduction. So this is a session where we look into the hazard information profiles, which are UNDRR guide set. So they manage these, and every few years they get renewed. They're very useful especially for early career researchers who are trying to get definitions and metrics of how we measure these disasters or hazards, I should say. And it's kind of, whilst it's not as much career orientated, it's still quite important to know and useful to know if you're coming to write an MSc or a PhD. It's nice to know you've got these resources there. So we're going to, in that session, explore what they are and how they can be used in your research. The next one is what we call building a supportive research community, the Young Scientist Forum. So this one, I don't think you attended last year. So last year we started to develop the Young Science Forum. So the idea of this one actually come out of the membership committee at IDRiM. So we have all these YSS, young scientists, coming in for the competition every year, but we never see many of them again. We only see them once, and the idea is that how do we, keep young scientists engaged, but also how do we basically help young researchers through the challenges of being a young researcher. So the idea is this session is that there will be some young researchers who will speak about their experience. Predominantly, they're going to be more senior ones of the young researchers, so they will have come towards the end of being a young researcher. And the idea is that they will talk about, we'll have a set of questions based upon the membership. They will give their response, but then we'll open the floor and we will say, does anyone have a story, an opinion? And the idea is to slowly understand what are the challenges. And for senior researchers, we can start to look at, well, how do we address these as a society? And what do young researchers need, and what can we physically do? And so the next one, the seventh one, is engage, contribute, and lead, the IDRiM Society Committee Showcase. So this one's a bit different. So this one is that IDRiM has 14 committees now, and the idea is that we want young researchers to participate, to lead, and to steer the IDRiM Society. And the idea is that we will showcase the different committees, what do they do, and basically give information of how they can participate. And hopefully a few of them will join. And that is the call to all the listeners who are young researchers. Please join us in these committees because you will help guide. I mean, perfect example is yourself and me, who've helped guide, this podcast. It's different. It's something that I don't see very many of in this field. And it's actually, it's a new level of engagement that we can do to the membership. And so the idea is that we want the society to continue growing, and that can only grow with more members and committees. And finally, it's something called the Researcher Roundtable. And what we mean by this is that this is a space for open discussion and networking. So it doesn't matter if you're a senior researcher or an early career researcher, this session is really open to use. It doesn't matter if you're just going to participate online or in person. If you're in person, it's a great way of catching up with people who've never met before the conference, which sometimes a daunting experience when you go to a conference. It's your first time at that conference and you don't know anyone there, so you kind of become quite reserved. Well, this is an experience to kind of make a few friends, and get to know a few people before you go, so that therefore you actually, you've got someone you can talk to when you get there, and you can ease yourself into the conference. But also, it's great for online. Those who can't travel, you still get the opportunity that you would normally have in an in-person conference to actually get to know each other, share knowledge potentially, even mentorship schemes. I have seen these at conferences where you go up to a senior researcher and you get talking, and actually eventually you end up getting a proposal. I mean, how many times have we heard in the last few weeks in podcasts and lectures about Nori Okada, with another young researcher he's helping to mentor through? And this is the sort of thing that we want, is that we want senior researchers to mentor young researchers, but that's not going to happen if the senior researchers don't know, the young researchers are here and, what type of engagement they want. So this is the whole point of this session.
Wow, that was rich informations that we got, that a lot of workshops are being prepared for the young scientists. So I think it will attract more people to come and to experience all those benefits that they will not get in many other conferences. Now, all of these features actually for all the participants of YSS, and as you mentioned that this is actually competitions. So what's there to win? Well, what's to motivate people to win these competitions? What will they get if they won this one?
Well, first of all, you know what it's like to win. So this year it's going to be like we do every year. So 2 competitions, online, in person. As I mentioned, they obviously have been judged throughout with 4 different criteria, from presentation ability to the content to actually how it looks. So there's different criteria, all adds up with different weightings. The top 3 will get a medal. They will get a certificate signed by the the president of the society, so Anna Maria Cruz, and it's usually by the local host. So probably this year it's going to be the mayor of Samos, or Samos. They will also get to present a further presentation in a webinar session in 2026. So there's a lot of things that will happen. Usually what we do is the webinar will take place around the time of the call for young scientists for the next year's conference. So the specific call for young scientists is obviously coming up in the next week or so. So that means that the Young Scientist Awards for 2025, from 24 going to 25, will be early April. Next year's conference we know is a little earlier. I'm not allowed to say what it is yet, but that means that the likelihood is that the online webinar will take place around the February of 26.
So it's actually a lot of rewards for them. Actually, not only uh chance to expose themselves to broader networks, but also the opportunity for them actually to accelerate their research by having to meet many different people in many different platforms. Now, all those advantages actually attract, well, myself as a young scientist itself. So for all the people that like me that very curious and want to join these young scientist sessions, how to do that? Is there any
Okay,
difference
so,
if they joining as regular participants, or there are some specific path they should take?
so the way it works is there is a specific entry for young scientists. So if you go onto our website, which will be in below this recording, but it's www.idream2025.com. You'll see it says Young Scientist submission. You will fill a form in. You would fill in a 400-word abstract with a few keywords. We will review it, and you will find out by the end of May whether you've been successful. The current deadline, as of today's recording is the 25th of April. So you've got around about a month from the time this goes out to submit. What will happen is if you accidentally submit as a regular one, or you don't feel comfortable, we still check who is in the regular session to make sure that there isn't anyone who should be in the YSS. Please note, there is, unlike previous years before the pandemic, there is no difference if you're a young researcher or if you are classed as a normal abstract in terms of how you present. So actually, it's more advantageous to submit as a young researcher now because you have more opportunities, you get more feedback, you get the opportunity to win this competition. More of a benefit now than it was previously.
So great. So well, that's very good news that we heard that how to join the IDRiM, especially for you all as a young scientist. Please keep in mind all the information here is actually will be available. So listen all of my co-hosts said about the workshops, how it will be judged, and how is the procedure of the young scientist session in iDream, and just submit all your research, regardless whether it's already in the final stage or even in the early stages. So everyone, well, this is podcast also part of the promoting the iDream 2025 and in particular to young scientists. And we hope, as a part of iDream Society, all of you can meet us and join iDream 2025 in Samos this year. As already mentioned by Mark, the website will be located below this podcast, which is in idream2025.com. Head to that site and register yourself. In the end, thank you very much for listening to us about the iDream 2025, and see you next week.